Get your filthy stuff off my desk and disappear. The only thing I want to hear from you is the sound of your absence." The voice, cold as ice, sliced through the quiet of the 90th floor penthouse office in Thorne Tower, a steel and glass monolith stabbing into the Manhattan sky. Outside, the city pulsed like a giant artery, but inside, the air was thick with power and arrogance. Sterling Thorne didn't bother to look at her. He stood with his back to the floor-to-ceiling glass wall, silver hair groomed to perfection, a $10,000 Tom Ford suit draped over his frame as if tailored for a marble statue. His eyes were fixed on the New York skyline, as though he owned every building, every street below. One hand gripped a phone, voice rumbling orders, while the other curled slightly, hiding a subtle tremor almost no one would notice except Evelyn. She froze, hand still holding the damp cleaning cloth, the same cloth she had carelessly placed too close to his stack of documents, the filth he spoke of. But instead of bowing her head and apologizing, her gaze merely flickered before she calmly withdrew it. It wasn't the look of a janitor. It was the look of Dr. Evelyn Reed, once the most promising neuroscience PhD candidate at Johns Hopkins, who had stood on international conference stages pointing to brain maps and speaking of the future of medicine. A woman who had lost everything because of a truth she refused to bury. Have you ever met someone who, with just one glance, made you certain they didn't belong in the place they'd been forced to stand? Sterling kept talking, his voice sharp as a blade. Accelerate Omnia. I don't care about so-called safety assurances. Meeting with the FDA next week. Everything must be ready. An S in his sentence slipped oddly, as if a pebble were caught between his tongue and teeth. Evelyn heard it clearly. She also caught the faint wince in his eyes as he looked at the massive holographic stock chart hovering in the air. He shook his head slightly, blaming eye strain. But to her, it was another piece of the puzzle, a fleeting episode of double vision. In recent weeks, she had noticed other pieces, his hand trembling as he poured coffee, the occasional uneven gait leaving the boardroom, a few seconds of disorientation as if forgetting where he was. Each observation was a crack in the supposedly unbreakable glass of his power. She left the office in silence, the rubber soles of her shoes muffled against the marble floor, fading into the wind's low howl outside. But in her mind, a diagnosis was beginning to take shape, not out of pity, but out of the instinct of a doctor that had never died. That night, her one-bedroom apartment in Queens felt like a different planet from the glass cage atop Manhattan. Yellow light spilled over a dusty bookshelf where old medical journals stood like loyal soldiers. Evelyn sat at the kitchen table, opening a worn leather-bound notebook. Her pen didn't shake. Each stroke was as precise as a scalpel. October 17th, subject, ST observation, mild myoclonic tremor in right hand, lasting 3 seconds. Slurring of consonants S. Reports of transient diplopia. She wasn't just cleaning Sterling Thorne's desk. She was building the medical file of one of the most powerful men in America. But beneath the clinical notes, she was also drafting a silent indictment. Because Omnia was not just Sterling's legacy, as he so often preached. It was a double-edged blade, a breakthrough in neurological treatment, but a potential catastrophe if safety protocols were ignored. And now, the man holding the fate of millions of patients showed signs of a brain tumor or aneurysm. Evelyn sat still, listening to the old clock ticking. Each sound felt like a countdown to an explosion only she could see. She knew, if no one intervened, disaster would strike not just Sterling, but the world beyond. A night breeze slipped through the window, stirring the fresh page she had just written. Evelyn pressed her hand over it, holding it down, like holding on to the resolve that had just risen within her. This would be the most important investigation of the career they had tried to bury. The soft roll of rubber cartwheels over polished marble echoed like the heartbeat of a giant building. Evelyn kept her head down, eyes following the gleam of the neon light on the freshly wiped floor, each step moving in rhythm with the cold pulse of the 90th floor. Then the scent hit her, not the sterile sting of disinfectant, nor the rich roast drifting from the barista's counter in the lobby. This was something far more familiar, so familiar it froze her in place. Creed Aventus. The scent of victory. The scent of privilege. The scent of betrayal. She looked up. Dr. Marcus Vance stepped out of Sterling's office, his courteous smile as soft as velvet and as sharp as a blade. A flawless navy suit, silk tie, and thin-rimmed glasses caught the hallway light so that his eyes seemed even colder. He spoke easily with Sterling, leaning in as though sharing a secret. And in an instant, an image yanked her 5 years into the past. Back then, Evelyn Reed was not Evie in a gray uniform. She was a neuroscientist leading groundbreaking research on early markers of degenerative disease. She had discovered irregularities in the trial data of a drug from the company where Vance worked. Numbers that didn't add up, severe side effects buried. She had brought proof. They hadn't talked about science. They had attacked her as a person. In the disciplinary hearing, Vance and the hospital board reframed her resolve as aggression, twisting a minor disagreement with a colleague into instability. They leveraged an insidious stereotype rooted deep in the medical field. The image of the angry black woman who saw conspiracy everywhere. Vance had closed that meeting with a sentence that felt like a verdict. Some people aren't born for this level, Evelyn. Maybe you should find something simpler. And they had stripped her of her license. The present-day laughter and chatter pulled her back to the cold steel corridor. Sterling and Vance were still walking, their words drifting lightly like air but landing in Evelyn's ears like lead. We'll skip the final trial phase. My data is perfect, Vance said, with the smug certainty of a man holding a hidden ace. The risk is acceptable to beat the competition. A chill traced Evelyn's spine. History was repeating itself. The same man, the same kind of lie, but this time not just a few dozen trial patients. This time thousands, tens of thousands. She glanced at Sterling. He listened, nodding slowly. The man who could sign off on or kill this decision was the same man whose hands now trembled and whose vision blurred with each passing day. The elevator doors closed behind them, leaving Evelyn alone in the hallway, the lights above reflecting endlessly on the floor like a frozen labyrinth. She stood still for a moment, inhaled deeply. The mission had changed. This was no longer about saving an ungrateful billionaire. This was a war to stop Marcus Vance. Saving Sterling Thorne was now only a means to a far greater end, preventing a medical catastrophe. That night, in her small Queens apartment, Evelyn opened the leather-bound notebook. Her handwriting today was sharper, heavier. Not just symptoms, conversation between SD and MV, skipping final trial. Keywords, perfect data, acceptable risk. Note, high risk of MV repeating prior misconduct on a larger scale. She began building a dual file, one for patient Sterling Thorne, one for Marcus Vance, the manipulator behind him. Each line was a silent blade, honed for the right moment. But one truth was undeniable. No matter how accurate these notes were, they meant nothing if locked in the drawer of a janitor. Who would believe them? An anonymous letter would be tossed in the trash before the second sentence was read. She needed someone inside the circle of power. A voice with weight. Someone who wanted the truth seen. In the days that followed, Evelyn came to accept a bitter truth. No matter how thick her leather-bound notebook grew with meticulous observations, it was still a lone, voiceless cry. In Sterling Thorne's world, the words of a janitor were nothing more than dust on a window ledge, brushed away before anyone even noticed. She needed someone inside the circle of power, not just standing in it, but with a voice that mattered. The opportunity arrived on a Friday afternoon, when the elevator doors to the 90th floor slid open and Amelia Thorne stepped out. Amelia, 24, is the only daughter of Sterling, a final-year Columbia law student. Unlike her father, Amelia carried the sharpness of intellect rather than arrogance. A light cream suit, hair pulled low, no elaborate makeup, but eyes bright and clear like a freshly honed blade. Evelyn had observed her a few times before. There was something in that gaze, not exactly sympathy, but a rare alertness for someone who had grown up in the shadow of power. That day, Amelia was there for an important video conference with Japanese investors. Evelyn saw her standing behind her father as he presented. Everything was smooth, until Sterling called a longtime partner by the wrong name, repeating it even after being gently corrected. The virtual room froze for a moment. Sterling frowned, then snapped, "Stop correcting me. I know what I'm saying." Amelia stayed silent, but Evelyn caught the brief flicker of confusion in her eyes, the look of someone who had just spotted a crack in a marble statue. That night, Evelyn decided to gamble. While cleaning Sterling's private office after hours, she accidentally dropped the leather-bound notebook under his desk, right beside the handbag Amelia had left behind. She cleaned as usual, left the room, the notebook open to a page detailing transient diplopia and right-hand myoclonic tremor. 10 minutes later, Amelia returned for her bag. She bent down and saw the notebook. At first, she thought it was a personal journal, but when she opened it, she found neat lines of handwriting filled with medical terminology, expressive aphasia, ataxia, executive dysfunction. Not a diary, a clinical tracking file. The door opened. Evelyn stepped back in, feigning surprise to find Amelia holding it. Amelia held it up. "What is this?" Evelyn replied evenly. "Those are my observations." Amelia looked straight at her. "You're a doctor." "Not a question." Evelyn nodded slightly. "I was, until men like your father and his friend, Dr. Marcus Vance, decided I wasn't anymore." Amelia's brow furrowed, silence stretching for a few seconds. Under the office lights, her eyes glinted with a mixture of suspicion and curiosity. "Tell me," Evelyn told her, "about the research years ago, about Marcus Vance, about the falsified data and the hidden side effects, about how they had stripped her career away with a flawless smear campaign, and now about Omnia, about Sterling's condition, a ticking time bomb." Amelia listened, chin resting lightly on her hand, her eyes shifting from doubt to tension. "What's your plan?" "Not a plan. A necessity. We need undeniable proof of his incapacity. Publicly. Before the board and the press. And it has to happen before Omnia is approved. That's my father." Amelia's voice trembled slightly. "And he's a patient about to endanger thousands of lives. We're the only ones who can stop it." Amelia stayed silent, so long that Evelyn thought she might walk away. Then her lips pressed into a thin line, a decision taking shape. In 72 hours, there's the final report meeting before the FDA. The entire board, investors, and the trade press will be there. If he fails there, they'll have to act. Evelyn nodded. "Then we create a situation he cannot overcome, but one that's still safe. And when it happens, I'll be there to make sure he survives." Their eyes met. On one side, a memory scorched by betrayal. On the other hand, love and responsibility for a powerful father whose mental map was slowly fading. This was not a comfortable alliance, but it was the only alliance that could change everything. The Thorne Pharmaceuticals boardroom blazed like a Broadway stage for the financial elite. A vast glass wall opened to a sweeping view of New York, the Statue of Liberty standing motionless in the crisp autumn morning light. The long walnut table gleamed like a polished runway under the cold glare of white LED lights. Black Italian leather chairs curved in an arc around the central presentation area. The air carried the unmistakable scent of power, fresh polished wood, warm ink on newly printed documents, and expensive perfume blending into a suffocating haze. Amelia Thorne sat in the front row, hands clasped, nails pressing lightly into her palms. She wasn't looking at the investors' murmuring calculations on the left, nor at the trade journalists in the back row. Her eyes stayed fixed on the closed double doors, where Sterling Thorne would appear at any moment. In the far corner, Evelyn stood near the massive glass panel, holding a mop like a stage prop to disguise her quiet surveillance. She wore the same gray uniform as always, but every nerve in her body was strung tight as a wire. The doors swung open. Sterling entered, Marcus Vance beside him. The dark blue suit, red tie, firm stride. It was convincing at a glance. But Evelyn saw it, the stiffness in his gait, the left leg half a beat behind the right. The way his gaze swept the room, as if surveying his territory, each shift of focus lagging just a fraction of a second. He greeted a few board members with quick handshakes, then moved to the podium. Amelia drew in a deep breath, tilted her head slightly, catching Evelyn's eye. A small nod. The plan was in motion. Amelia had altered the presentation at the last minute, inserting dense, data-heavy charts that would force Sterling to process information live, and swapping his familiar clicker for a hypersensitive model, one that would misfire at the slightest tremor. Sterling began. Omnia, he said, voice booming, is a monumental leap forward in neurological treatment. The first slide passed without issue. On the second, he hesitated, squinted, then read a figure wrong. Treatment efficacy is 49, 94%. A faint ripple of whispers spread, quickly cut off by his tight smile. The third slide. He clicked, but the display jumped 2 pages ahead. His hand trembled visibly now, the small vein at his temple throbbing faster. Marcus Vance leaned into cover. Richard is simply too passionate about the data. A few chuckles surfaced, but no one truly believed it. Then a board member stood, asking, "Can you explain in detail the neurological side effects recorded during trials?" Sterling froze. His eyes blinked rapidly. His mouth opened, then shut. He repeated the question like a schoolboy stalling for time. Side effects? The silence spread over the room like a sheet of cold glass. Amelia's hands clenched tighter. Evelyn felt her own heartbeat quicken. This would escalate fast. Sterling drew in a breath, lifted his head, and a flash of instinctive arrogance lit his gaze. Omnia is the future, and I am. The words cut off as his body convulsed violently. His eyes rolled back, a strangled sound escaping his mouth, and he collapsed like a toppled marble statue. Chairs scraped back. Shouts erupted. Papers scattered like startled birds. A wave of chaos swept through the room. Evelyn moved without thinking. She dropped to her knees beside Sterling, loosening his tie, rolling him into the recovery position, her eyes locked on his airway. "Someone call 911 now," she barked, voice sharp and commanding. "Time to seizure. Clear the area. Don't hold him down." Men in $1,000 suits obeyed instantly. Even Marcus Vance backed away, panic flickering in his eyes. Evelyn kept Sterling's head tilted, one hand guarding his temple from hitting the floor. The seizure lasted 38 seconds. To Evelyn, each one was a battle. When it ended, Sterling lay still, breathing heavily. Evelyn checked his pulse, then looked up as the medical team rushed in. Her voice turned clipped and clinical. "Male, 62, generalized seizure. Likely brain tumor, needs urgent MRI. Medical history will follow." Sterling was lifted onto a gurney. Amelia followed, gripping her father's hand. Evelyn stayed behind, exhaling slowly. In the eyes of those remaining, she was no longer an invisible janitor. She was the doctor who had just saved their CEO's life. And more than that, she had opened a door no one in that room could ever close again. The storm had passed, and it had left shards of glass that could never be pieced back together. Mount Sinai Hospital, ICU. The sharp scent of antiseptic mingled with the steady beeping of monitors, like a clock counting down. Sterling Thorne lay motionless, his face aged beyond his years. Outside the glass wall, doctors exchanged brief words, their eyes grave. The diagnosis was undeniable: glioblastoma, one of the most aggressive and lethal brain cancers. The emergency surgery had saved Sterling's life, but it had also ended his career. Chemotherapy, radiation, and months of uncertainty lay ahead. Amelia stood by her father's bedside, her hand gripping his cold one. She said nothing, but her eyes held a storm. At the far end of the corridor, Evelyn stood silently, not intruding. This was not a moment for speeches. But at Thorne Pharmaceuticals headquarters, another kind of earthquake was already underway. The emergency board meeting had been convened while Sterling was still on the operating table. Amelia entered, not with the fragility of a daughter concerned for her father, but with the sharp presence of a lawyer stepping into the courtroom. In her hands was not only Evelyn's leather-bound notebook, but also the file on Marcus Vance, both his buried past and his newly exposed present. She began with medical facts, Sterling's documented cognitive decline over several weeks. Then she connected it seamlessly to the recorded conversations in which Vance had pushed to skip Omnia's final trial phase. Next, she pulled open the past. 5 years ago, Vance had been suspected of falsifying data to hide severe side effects in another drug. That time, the sole witness had her career destroyed, Evelyn Reed. Today, Amelia said, her voice measured but trembling at the edges, "Without Evelyn Reed, my father would have died in that boardroom. And without her records, thousands of patients would become live test subjects for an unsafe drug. Vance didn't just betray my father. He betrayed the entire medical profession." The room was silent. The board members' eyes shifted from Amelia to Vance. He gave a strained smile, tugging at his tie. "This is slander." "There is no, we have it," a board member cut in, sliding a thick folder to the center of the table. "And you will answer for it in court." In less than 10 minutes, the decision was made. Omnia would be suspended indefinitely pending a full data review. Marcus Vance was terminated immediately and faced criminal charges. 6 months later, sunlight streamed into the lab at the Federal Institute for Neurological Research in Boston. Evelyn Reed stood in a crisp white lab coat at a workbench with her research team. On the screen, fresh Omnia data appeared, this time unaltered. They were working to salvage its potential while eliminating its risks. The door opened. Sterling Thorne walked in. No power suit, just a turtleneck sweater and slacks. He leaned on a walnut cane, his steps slow but steady. His face was leaner, his hair whiter, but the arrogance in his eyes was gone. Evelyn didn't turn. She stayed, bent over the microscope, adjusting the focus. Sterling stopped a few steps behind her. His voice was lower, weaker. "Dr. Reed, I read your original research, the paper they buried 5 years ago. It was brilliant." He placed a folder on the table. "The Thorne Foundation is now under my direct control. We will fund your lab indefinitely. Whatever you need, it's yours." A pause. Evelyn didn't look at him. The sunlight caught on the microscope lens, illuminating her focused eyes. "The world needs better science, Mr. Thorne," she said evenly, steel beneath her calm. "Not bigger egos." She went back to her work. Sterling stood for a few seconds, then nodded. "No debate, no justification." He turned away, the sound of his cane tapping the floor echoing down the long hallway. Evelyn remained at the bench, her hand steady on the microscope. A young colleague asked quietly, "Do you regret it?" She smiled faintly. "No, justice isn't applause. It's when the truth is put where it belongs." Afternoon light poured into the lab, spilling over the clean white pages of fresh data. In that moment, Evelyn Reed knew she was exactly where she belonged, not in the glass cage of the powerful, but at the heart of science, where every discovery was a promise to the world. In the end, Evelyn Reed didn't need an apology to reclaim the truth. She wasn't seeking revenge. She had reclaimed what they tried to bury: her honor, her justice, and her right to keep saving lives. From an invisible woman cast out of the medical world, she had stood in the boardroom of a billion-dollar corporation, saved the life of the man who once called her filth, and brought down the man who had destroyed her career. This story reminds us, power can buy silence, but it cannot buy intellect, courage, or the truth. And if you've ever been underestimated, pushed to the margins, remember, as long as you hold on to your values, one day you'll step back in, not for revenge, but to set things right. What do you think of Evelyn's choice? Share your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Toch Story so you won't miss the stories that touch the heart and stir your faith in justice.